All right, this panel will be a little different than the previous panels. My name is Steve Bolin. I lead government affairs at Livermore National Laboratory. We're going to spend an hour talking about policy and infrastructure. Those are very closely related. And we're lucky to have 4 people here who know a lot about that. Senator Caballero, who is been a champion of this area for many years, and she just brings such a knowledge about carbon management as well as the challenges of this area. And among many things that she's accomplished, she was the lead author on Senate Bill 905, which has really been really important to setting the framework for moving forward in a lot of these ways. We also have Kate Gordon, who has a unique perspective, both by being in California government, leading the Office of Planning and Research early in the Newsom administration, and then being called to Washington to be in Secretary Granholm's office to lead what is essentially community engagement activities. We also have Glenda Humiston from UC, a longtime observer and engager of agriculture in the state through the UC network, and so brings a unique perspective there. And certainly, last but certainly not least, Julio Friedman, who really he's been involved with carbon his entire career, from Exxon to Livermore National Lab, now to Carbon Direct, where they work on certified carbon removal credits. His whole career has really been about managing carbon. So I'm going to ask some questions, and I'd like to start with Senator Caballero. You bring this perspective of being an advocate for District 14 and the surrounding area, as well as understanding the challenges of carbon management. So does it surprise you that the Roads to Removal report identifies Merced and the Central Valley as a potential epicenter for carbon removal opportunities?
Thank you very much for that question, and I want to really thank everybody that's been a part of this 2-day symposium. It's great to see so many people learning about carbon capture and some of the opportunities we have. So no, I'm not surprised that the report identified the Central Valley as a potential location. It's one of the reasons I've become so passionate about the opportunity that we have as we have a changing climate to look at what are the biggest challenges we have in the region, and how can we meet as many of those challenges as possible. We know that the air quality is bad. We know that people want good jobs. That's a #1 issue people talk to me about, are good jobs, good paying jobs where they can afford to live here. If we can clean our water source as part of the solution, and we can get rid of waste, whatever the waste is, whether it's dairy waste or whether it's on-farm waste or trash, for example. All of those are opportunities, and the ability to do carbon capture, to create, as part of our the solution, a hydrogen hub in this region, and to be able to geologically store it is incredible. It's an incredible opportunity, and I think if there is a time, it's kind of like the timing is not going to get any better. In other words, the time is now for all of us to get educated, to understand what the opportunities are, and to make some good choices that help us to check off as many of those problems, if you will, as possible, and be a part of the energy future and be a part of prosperity in the state of California. It's one of the issues I think that's the hardest to work for, because we have some of the lowest wages. We can continue to do agriculture, which is what is critically important. I heard what Secretary Ross has to say. We have an incredible food security issue. And as we feed the world, we need to figure out how to do it more efficiently and more abundantly. And this creates that opportunity, and I'm excited with as many people as we see here, not because we have all the solutions, but because we got to figure it out together. Every part of the community has to be engaged in this, and the more community education we can do, the better it's going to be, so that we can make sure we're doing it with the most responsible, risk-free technology available.
Thank you, Senator. Moving on, Glenda, among the leaders of University of California and its strong focus on resources and agriculture in terms of carbon removal, what have you been seeing throughout the state? What do you think is needed to excite people about these prospects from your point of view at UC?
Great, thank you very much for that. And I'm going to speak to not just agricultural carbon, but our forest and frankly our municipalities. We got a lot of biomass there too. I think the thing that's exciting me the most is actually seeing the pieces coming together. For those of you that do jigsaw puzzles, you know how it is. You get a corner, you get a line, you start getting some big clumps in the middle. I really feel like we're starting to see those big clumps getting bigger and coming together, and it's really exciting. And what I mean by that is, I was fortunate probably 15, 20 years ago in a previous job to become associated with the California Stewardship Network, which is a statewide organization of regional economic development orgs that believe in the triple bottom line: people, planet, and prosperity. And I use that word prosperity rather than profit very deliberately. And that group has been at the forefront for over a decade now with the State Economics Summit elsewhere, looking at biomass and looking at how we as a state can stand up a complete manufacturing sector around bio-based products. And I'll be the first to admit, I'm really agnostic about what products we produce, as long as they're getting produced here in California, as long as they're part of the circular economy. I prefer them to be locally owned, which would solve a whole lot of the concerns our communities rightfully have. And I think we're seeing that. We're seeing things like RCRC, the rural county supervisors, have actually went out and created one entire supply chain around a bio-based product, from the master plan with the Forest Service, through the siting, through the manufacturing, and markets in South Korea and Japan for wood pellets, very dense wood pellets, which aren't a permanent solution, but they're a solution for 5 or 10 years while Japan is coming off of nuclear and off of coal-fired plants. It's part of their transition. And they proved that you could build a supply chain all the way from source through market. They also stood up their own financing fund. And we've got others around the state, like Blue Forest. I was just asked to come to a thing in a couple weeks with COIN. The insurance industry is now investing tens of millions of dollars in these type of activities. But I think for us, what we've really got to do is take advantage of the pieces of the foundation we're putting together. You know, we did pass SB 859 a few years ago, which was a blessing, because it did many things like help clean up the building codes in the state to allow use of a lot of these products. It created the Joint Institute on Wood Products Innovation, UC, CSU, and the Board of Forestry, that's done amazing stuff. And we've started looking at things like mapping. We've been mapping where the sites are that we could be doing this kind of manufacturing. Small, local, existing industrial sites. Old sawmills, old biomass plants, old industrial sites, so we don't have to be looking at pristine land. And we're looking at things like a spoken hub center. Because again, a lot of the small rural communities, not just this state, but nationally, never fully recovered from the 2008 recession. And they have a huge opportunity here to A, have some solid economic development and jobs, but do it while they're helping us deal with climate smart activities in forestry and ag, et cetera. I could keep going, but I'll shut up for the moment.
Thank you, Glenda. Kate, the Department of Energy's carbon negative Earthshot is an important goal. But having worked in the Secretary's office and worked with communities, how does the Secretary's office, and DOE as a whole think about this goal in the context of community engagement?
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a great question, and what a great honor to be on this panel with some of my heroes. So I'm thrilled to be here. So I think first, just why did the Department of Energy do the Earth Shot, which is really, the Earth Shot, like the Moon Shot, is really a recognition of the need to get to something and not being entirely sure how to get there. So really setting that goal to say, there is no question that we have to deal with the amount of carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere right now. And I think my own perspective on that, coming into the Newsom administration right after the 2018 fires, my first job was to run the Catastrophic Wildfire Commission, which sort of got thrown into that trial by fire. It is just true that we cannot just be as aggressive as possible about, mitigating emissions, not emitting, reducing emissions in our existing activities. We have to be as aggressive as possible in actually doing something about our current atmosphere, because it is 50 or 100 years ago emissions that are causing those impacts today, that are causing those floods and fires, and that are causing us to have the air quality we have when those things happen. That's very visceral, I think, on the ground. It's hard to talk about 1.5 degrees. It's easy to talk about what it's like when the sky is orange and what that means for your kids' health. And I think that's just incredibly important. So the department knew we had to deal with this. And the department was created in the 70s to deal with hard issues in our energy economy, and this is a hard issue. And so really set that vision and that goal. And I think that's critically important, to have that aspirational goal out there. But then, you have to turn immediately to what does that actually mean for people, for real people. And one of the things the secretary asked me to do when she asked me to come into the administration was really to bring a place-based approach to Department of Energy. This is an agency that's been about science and research for a long time. Any of you who saw Oppenheimer and they're putting the marbles in the jars, that's the early Atomic Energy Agency. That was the beginning of the department. Very science-y. And so lots of incredible scientists and engineers, including at the labs, not necessarily a lot of social scientists or a lot of people with deep experience working in communities. Given that we now have, $100 billion at the department being deployed in real projects in real places that are real steel in the ground, that are actually creating real impacts. I mean, these are places that need energy to have an economy at all. We all rely on energy all the time, but these energy projects can be economic anchors in these communities, but only if they're done well. Only if they're done well. If you're in a transition from an energy economy, let's say you're in transition from anything really, from timber, right? I mean, we all went through the transition from burning wood. That was a transition. We went from the transition from horses to cars. We're going through transitions now in agriculture, as you've heard, in oil and gas, as you've heard in all of these different sectors. As you go through those transitions, it doesn't help a community if you put in a new thing that's the new, cool industry, and then it goes away after 2 years because it couldn't survive without subsidy, or because it wasn't done in collaboration with the community, or because the workforce wasn't skilled, right? That is not helpful to either the industry or the community or the Earth Shot, right? So what we did at the department when I came in, and it was me with a lot of people, was basically to say, look, we have all this money going out the door. It's public money. Public money should serve a public purpose. We created and now attach at the department these community benefits requirement to all of these competitive grants, including in the direct air capture hubs, including in the work being done around BiCRS or in other areas, to say, if you're a private company and you're getting money from the public sector, this is my money, your money, this is taxpayer money. If you're getting money, you actually need to tell us, why did you choose this place? What are the characteristics of this place that make this project actually viable? How are you engaging with workers and community to make sure that you're creating pathways to shared prosperity, as the senator said? What we can't afford to do is have a transition to another economy that exacerbates the income inequality we already have. We can't have a transition to another economy that leaves out a whole bunch of people, or another economy that creates more problems than it solves. So what we were saying is, look, we know way up here we have to do this, but we have to do it better than we did it last time. And I think that was really the goal. And there's a lot more to say about the community benefits plans and why they're structured the way they are. But what it fundamentally is a recognition that we need to start holding, that public money to a real public purpose.
Thank you. Changing gears a bit, Julio, the low carbon fuel standard credits have been a really effective policy mechanism to spur innovation in California transportation system. Is there something similar that could help incentivize California agriculture to innovate in the carbon management space? And what other policy instruments might be deployed?
Awesome question. First, I have not had to follow a crew of 3 incredible speakers like this before, so tough room, I guess. Second, before I say something, let me say something, if I may. We are not running out of land. We are not running out of natural resources. We are not running out of money either. We actually have lots of money. There are people who want to put money into California and solve these problems and build things. We are running out of time. We're running out of time on climate. We're running out of time on tax credits. We're running out of time on permits. We're running out of time on grant money. Like, there's an open window right now. And if we want a just, verdant world that's awesome in every way, we're on the clock. And in that context, the kinds of things that can be done through the low carbon fuel standard and other policies end up becoming useful. Let me talk about that first, and then 2 sine qua nons that I think will help. First of all, the low carbon fuel standard has been incredibly useful to drive policy. And the reason why is because it is big, down, and certain. That's it. They're like, you must decrease everything 10% by this time, 20% by this time. Y'all figure it out, but it's big and it's down. You got 10 years, go. Big, binding, and down is a great way to do these things. And then they said there's lots of options you can use. For example, clean hydrogen. For example, electricity. For example, direct air capture. Direct air capture is considered a California fuel. That's awesome. And in point of fact, that gives revenue for projects. It literally is something you can take to the bank. There's risk around that. The numbers and the prices go up and down, but there's certainty around it. Frankly, among other things that the state could do, the state legislature or CARB could actually increase the stringency. Say, hey, instead of 20% by 2030, how about 25%? Or how about making sure that we are 50% by 2040? By having that stringency, it actually keeps the market elevated in value, and that makes it easier for people to do. But specifically to get stuff going in the Central Valley, there's a couple of things that could be done in the legislature and a couple of things that could be done in CARB. One of the things that CARB could do is they could say, hey, direct air capture isn't the only game in town. If there's other valid, durable ways to remove CO2, we are in. You need to be this tall to go on this ride. You have to show us you've done the job. It has to work, blah, blah, blah. But if you go through our rubric and our process, you can also qualify as a California fuel. Because in fact, California still emits 120 million tons of CO2 every year. It goes into a well-mixed atmosphere. If you're pulling it out, that's a California fuel abatement. So go. Biochar could do the same thing. So mineralization could do the same thing. So there's ways to think about increasing the portfolio of compliance options through statute, right? Another thing you can do is actually say, hey, if you have a carbon negative fuel, that is worth more. So if you have carbon negative sustainable aviation fuel, carbon negative ethanol, you get a multiplier on your credit. And it's just rewarding good behavior, literally. It's just like, if you've done this extra good thing, then you get an extra lollipop. Awesome. And that's a very good way to get people to do things. And that tends to be the way that we do these things in this country, is we give people lollipops. The things that we need, though, the 2 last things, very quick, that we don't have that we do need, one of them was mentioned already. We do not have the trained workforce we need to pull this off. And I mean trained in a broad sense. We don't have the electricians. We don't have the pipe fitters. We don't have communications experts or tax equity lawyers or regulators necessary to pull this off. So we got to get community colleges running on full tilt. If only there were a University of California presence in Merced, then maybe we could do something here. The other thing we don't have is infrastructure. Remember this if you don't remember anything else from today's talk. For the rest of your life, every week is infrastructure week. We are going to be building roads, rail, transmission lines, factories, facilities, pipelines. We're going to be building these things because that's what creates the awesome world we want, right? And if we're not building the infrastructure, we're not building what we need. Because in order to get the tax credits, in order to get the market buy-in, you need things like a train to bring wood to your BiCRS facility. And if you don't have that, you're not getting very far. So we need to figure out how to do all these things at the same time, but this is a wonderful time and I'm excited.
Thank you, Julio. That was a great answer and a perfect lead into my next question for Senator Caballero. And you've been busy in the carbon management space in the legislature. And what do you think has been some of the most impactful legislation to date? What do you think is missing, and what do you think is next?
Well, thank you for that question. And actually, I think Julio just answered it all. It's, the cap and trade program has been one of the most important programs that the state has adopted, and it's provided an opportunity for us to really start looking at carbon and reducing our carbon footprint. But the LCFS that Julio just talked about has been tremendously important as well. Interestingly enough, those carbon credits through the LCFS program you can apply for them. You can apply to get reimbursed for your program, or to get money for your project, even if you're doing the work in Texas or Louisiana or some other state. The whole idea being that what we want to do is work as a country to reduce the carbon footprint. And if they're doing something, a good project that's beneficial, that's good. It's good for us all. We're in this world together, and we've got to see that opportunity. But there is a lot more work to do. The ability to use carbon or to reduce carbon as we create cement was really important in SB 905. That what's really exciting about that is the first direct air carbon capture project in the country. The proof of concept was done in Tracy by Heirloom, and that is an incredibly important project. If you ever get a chance to go by and do a tour, I recommend it. The company worked in conjunction with the city of Tracy to make sure that they had the infrastructure in place and that they met the needs of the community as well. So to get to Kate's point, the community benefits become really important, and community buy-in is really, really important as well. And I want to emphasize that because the Arches project, which is a statewide hydrogen project that just got $1.2 billion from the federal government, has a community benefits component as well. And they're going to be talking to people in the community and trying to find out what are the things your community needs that we can be helpful on as part of doing this project together. But the kinds of things that we need is we need to treat hydrogen, carbon capture, and biomass as we have treated solar and wind projects. And let me say that again, we have to treat these kinds of projects very similar to how we treat solar and wind. And that means that we need to have an expedited CEQA judicial review process, which means we have a way to be able to get them to the front of the line when they're being sued, and have a judge decide in an expeditious way whether there is more mitigation that has to be done. This does not waive CEQA. It just says, let's make sure we're getting it done and we're doing it on time, number one. And number two is the state has set up an expedited permit process. And for those of you who have ever tried to get a permit, either from local government or the state, you'll appreciate this. The ability to do a process that's streamlined, that is more ministerial, is really important as well. If we're going to use the $1.2 billion from the federal government to do the hydrogen projects, hydrogen production, which will help us to meet our climate goals, which can reduce NOx and SOx because of diesel particulates and jet fuel. And for those of you that see the grayness in the air during the summer, those are NOx and SOx. and the ability for us to reduce carbon in those industries, in the aviation industry, in the marine industry, and in the heavy-duty trucking industry, we need to expedite projects. In other words, if we don't, we lose the money. It will go to another state. If DOE sees that we're taking too long, it can be moved to another state. So there's a lot more work to be done. And part of it is educating the legislature, because anything that's scary becomes a no, kind of. And we need to do the same work in the local community so people understand what the opportunities are. They can speak about it. They can talk to these companies that are looking for partners, and we can all work on this together. I mean, it's a really exciting time, but the pieces, as Glenda said, we're trying to put the pieces together, and they've got to fit. And so it's only by working together and picking out the pieces that are going to really move the projects either forward or one way or another. I don't want to prejudge that everything is going to be a good project. We want to make sure they're really good for our region.
Okay, thank you very much. I know some of the panel members want to add on to that. In fact, all of them do. So we'll start with Kate and move this way.
That was so much food for thought in there. And I was just going to say I agree with 90% of what the senator said. I don't think we need to treat these projects exactly like wind and solar. And by that, I mean, I think we learned a lot actually about how not to do energy development from sort of the, let's focus on speed and scale without thinking about the workers, without thinking about taxes. One thing that's super important in this new space and where we are now, I think, with the energy transition is really solidifying those benefits to communities, as we talked about. And that means we do need to charge taxes to these projects, that creating a tax base is really important. If you're transitioning from something that provides a significant amount of your tax base to something that doesn't, that is a problem for communities. It doesn't matter how green the thing is, right? We need to make sure that the jobs being created are really good family supporting jobs. And one of the challenges with renewables has been, as we all know, the reason they're so cheap after you build them is because you don't have to mine or refine anything after you build them. But that also means you don't have mining and refining jobs. So how do we think about expanding supply chains, not just thinking about installing the energy thing, but actually doing supply chains? And I'll just say the thing I like about this conversation we're having today, honestly, is that these types of projects, particularly in sort of the BiCRS space and some of the soil management and some of the other agricultural practice stuff and forestry, is that they're ongoing jobs. These are ways to make an existing industry better and stronger and create more jobs that are better jobs over the life of a project. But we all have to still be at the table making sure that's true. So I would say yes, and let's make sure that we do it even better.
Glenda, go ahead.
Yeah, one other thing I would have to throw out there that I think is critically important, particularly given some of the conversations around communities and doing this right, and equity issues, is technical assistance. We've seen the results of beautiful research. I mean, our University of California, other universities have produced a great deal of research product on new technologies, new ways to do this, processes around creating bio-based products. This very report we're looking at here, that's a great example. But there's a real need to make sure that research is also happening out in the communities and that research is being extended to the communities. And I have to say, we're still not quite there, although we're making some great momentum there. I mean, thanks to a historic investment in our UC Cooperative Extension about 3 or 4 years ago, largely due to some heavy lifting by Secretary Karen Ross and Senator John Laird, your colleague, we got enough funding to put almost 100 new cooperative extension scientists out there in the field, which allowed us the room to create some around this very issue that didn't exist before. So right now, we've got folks in some parts of the state that are working with local communities to put together their strategies around bio-based products, to figure out what the supply chains might be, how it could be locally owned. I've also got one of the only people in the state, evidently, that knows anything about biohydrogen, because I put him down in Riverside and San Bernardino counties, and the whole state's calling him up. I need to clone him several times over, because everybody wants to talk about biohydrogen right now. Nobody knows what to do about it. And by that, I don't mean very smart people on campus or very smart people in Sacramento. I mean city councils, county supervisors, NGOs, local businesses. They're just like, what is this? How do we get part of this? How can we help put a proposal together, maybe get some of that grant money? And that's really where our cooperative extension folks are trying to facilitate that. We're right now trying to create some new positions. For example, I've been pushing the University of California for several years now to be a leader in utilizing advanced wood products in everything we build. I haven't gotten as far as I would like, probably because I need a cooperative extension specialist who does nothing but meets with the architects and designers at every campus in the state to convince them that advanced wood products are really a good thing. Because they're used to concrete and steel and they don't know any better. Why would they? They were trained a certain way, and until they have somebody that they can respect, a fellow UC scientist that can come in and say, hey, look at this product. This is its advantages. This is how it could replace concrete and steel. Why would they change? So that kind of technical assistance, and I could keep giving you examples. There's many of them out there. Supply chains, marketing, access. I mentioned that hub and spoke earlier. I think that hub and spoke concept is going to really be a game changer here. Because you heard earlier today, you can't move biomass more than about 40 miles. You can't. But if you could move it to some of these existing sites that are scattered all up and down the Sierra, the Cascade, everywhere else, and do some early pre-processing and sorting, because all biomass is not made equal. It's got different highest and best uses, so do a little sorting. And maybe there's some mini scale. One of the things I love here at the engineering school at UC Merced, they look at how to create small and medium scale technologies for manufacturing. We need a lot more of that. Small and medium scale manufacturing that can be profitable. And I love the fact the engineering school here does a focus on that. But also just things like how to get some of that pre-processing, and then you've got a feedstock. You might be able to take a little further out of several spokes to a hub that can do the manufacturing cost effectively. And it might be near a highway or a railroad or a port of Stockton or something like that. So that kind of thing, that's the stuff that we're trying to facilitate, is that technical assistance, bringing all the players together so that we can move forward.
Thank you, Glenda. Julio.
Very quickly to one of the things that Senator Caballero talked about, it's always possible to do something stupid. It's also always possible to do something awesome. And the differential is not very large. It takes a little bit of planning and imagination. I had the good fortune of going to a ribbon cutting about a month ago for a new sustainable aviation fuel plant in Georgia. And they voted with their feet early and hard to be awesome, and they did so by serving the community. They not only upgraded the utilities in the community because they needed more power and needed more gas, so they did that, but they made sure they supersized it so the community would benefit. They also trained and supersized the first responders so that there was an immediate benefit to the community that was helpful. It's not that hard, doesn't take that much money, just takes a little bit of thought and planning. Along those lines, to Glenda's point, and remind me never to follow you, man, you're a tough act. There are, fun fact, 100 years ago, there were 0 medical schools. 0. People were doing medical research, but there wasn't medical schools. Instead, they said, you know, this is something we would benefit from, pooling the resources of our universities, creating a whole new institution that serves the local public and the general problem set well. Today, there are a total of 2 climate schools in the world. One at Columbia University, one at Stanford. They were born with the same idea. We're not just going to do climate research. We're going to have to create practical solutions for the communities where we live and the broader society we work in. And if you take that kind of perspective, then actually a climate school can become a way to supercharge the kind of technical assistance program that Glenda was describing. And not only training people to do that, but having institutional support to make that possible.
I think we've got something that works here. Great. That's a perfect lead in to the last question that I will ask all of you before we turn it over to questions from the audience. We can learn something from foreign countries. One of the things that we could learn, I think, is about the community involvement in the siting of difficult to site activities. The most notable example is quite recently in Finland, they have licensed a nuclear waste repository for their nuclear power plants. This was done through a community competitive process and a negotiation with the government, where communities actually competed for the opportunity to host this site in exchange for long-term benefits bestowed by the central government. That seems to be an effective way, it's been used in other countries, to get very hard things done. So I'd like to ask the panel, what do you think about that kind of approach in California? Do you think it would work? What are the impediments? Or is that just not a model that would work for us? And I'll let whoever wants to speak first take it on, but I want everybody to have a chance, and we only have about 5 minutes before we need, less than 5 minutes before we need to go to the audience.
Well, I can take this one to start with. I think the idea of a community competitive process is very intriguing. I like the idea because if your community is interested in having a discussion about siting a difficult facility in your community, you can apply, or you can bid, or whatever they call it. But if you're not interested, you don't have to, and you know that it's not going to be placed there over your objections. So I like the process, frankly.
Oh, thanks. That was great. I mean, yes, 100% we can learn from other countries. The Department of Energy is actually already starting to do consent-based siting for nuclear waste based on these same models. So I think nuclear waste is at the far end of the spectrum of contentious projects. So, but there's things we can learn. I've been really interested in Canada, actually. Canada and Australia are both similar to the United States in that they are very resource intensive, and a lot of projects happen particularly on Indigenous land in both those places as well. In Canada, a model that we looked at a lot when developing the community benefits plan was the First Nations Major Projects Coalition in Canada, which is a collection of about 150 different First Nations who are organized into a coalition with legal and finance support to do negotiation with the federal government on any project located on First Nation land, which is a lot of projects. They negotiate from the perspective they come to the table with land ownership, which is significant, but they also come to the table with the ability to make the project happen or not happen. And they have come away with, in particular, equity in the projects. The Hydro 1 project that was recently cited up in Manitoba has 50% equity for the First Nations whose land it's on. So I think thinking about that is really important. The last thing I'll say about it is, well, first, like many, many things in this country actually also are likely to be sited either on or near tribal land, especially critical mineral mining. There's a White House report showing that sort of all of the opportunities there are either on or within 20 miles of tribal land. So I think there is a higher bar when something's on tribal land for direct, accountable legal negotiation with the tribe. But I also think what this requires, and it's sort of my plea to everyone in the room to an extent, is in order to have a negotiation, you have to be able to come to the table, which means not only capacity, but also a willingness to decide that someone represents you at the table. That's actually, it's a bar you have to meet to be able to be in a negotiation on either side. So that means who is at the table becomes really important, but also letting that person or organization represent the community to come to a negotiated enforceable agreement. That actually takes some work. And I think it's super, super important to know that if that's what we want, then we have to be able to be willing to do it.
all of that, plus I'll add one other concept out there, which gets into general permitting. But not general permitting that's all or nothing, because I think most of the community gets very nervous about that. But we know, we've mapped, there are hundreds of existing industrial sites around this state that would be potentially very useful in bio-based products manufacturing of all sorts, or even just the early pre-processing. We know where they are. We have a great deal of information on them. And we've got very smart people that could figure out a tiered system. Some of those sites, I would take a wild guess that at least a third, if not more, are no-brainers. The community wants them. The roads are there. The site itself is already developed. And just give them a general permit and free up our CEQA environmental scientists and others that do those reviews for the ones that aren't no-brainers, where we do need to figure out some mitigation or some improvement somewhere. But we do have dozens of existing industrial sites out there that are literally no-brainers. If we can do a permit from the legislature for football stadiums, why can't we do it for these kind of sites?
Julio.
So we have to enter communities the way that God made us. One mouth, two ears. We don't do that very often. So I'm going to stop talking because I want your questions.
Okay, I have one quick question. Senator mentioned educating the legislature. I know that the four of us who aren't elected officials at the moment have spent a lot of time trying to educate the legislature. What I'd like to hear from the senator is, in your experience, what do you think is the best way for us to educate the legislature?
Boy, you put me on the spot here. I think that, part of the challenge with anything new is that it's contentious. And this science is not easy, right? And it's just hard enough so that most people don't want to know the details, and they're confused about what the options are, and are we doing something that is not going to be in the best interest of the community, and are we shoving it down their throats, which no one has suggested. But the other thing is that it is easier to be polarized about something that's difficult than to sit and have a conversation and come to some kind of a middle ground. And so the challenge I think we have is that it is easier to scare people. This is in this realm. It's easier to scare people than it is to engage them and get them discussing things. And right now, part of the challenge is that way back, it was determined that solar and wind would be the only kind of energy that would be green, and that everything else was not really green. And we've got to look at this and figure out how can we protect communities, and in particular disadvantaged communities, and then how can we create opportunities for us to move forward. So let me just say that the solution for energy in many organizations is to do industrial solar along in the entire valley. In other words, we're a real good source of solar energy in the Central Valley and in the Imperial Valley. And so the solution is, you don't have water, you got to stop growing agriculture, and you just put out these solar panels. They don't create, and I'm a big proponent of solar, let me just say that, but it is not life-sustaining for the valley, either for the people that work here. And I heard somebody say that there's somebody offering relocation for farm workers. Just tell you how offended I am about that concept, is that we're going to take We're going to destroy all opportunity to earn a living, and we'll pay you to move instead. That is pretty outrageous. People have lived here for generations, and they ought to be able to make a decision about where they want to live and be a part of the community. So we need to have alternatives. And the way that you, like I told you at the beginning, that you check off all of these boxes, good paying jobs, clean air, potable water so that we can continue to live here, create an opportunity to grow food that we all enjoy. There's a whole list of them. If we can do all of that, then we're going to be more successful as a valley. And so the challenge, I think, in terms of educating the legislature on this issue is, for me, it's repetition. It's coming and talking about it over and over and over again. Getting some of the best scientists to talk about how the technology is changing and what the benefits are and the problems it can solve for, and having community engagement with people so that they see that there's a community behind them that thinks that this is important as well. I think we have to do all of that. And if we don't, it becomes difficult to ask people to, I ask them to vote on stuff all the time, but I would like to be more successful. So I think the way is to really make sure the legislature hears from all of us that it's ag believes this is important, the water irrigation district thinks this is important, that the food industry thinks this is important. One of the biggest problems that one of the large food producers has here locally is that they use a lot of water, and the water that they have left over is not potable. They need it clean. Well, there's a company that can come in and clean that water, use it, and create hydrogen at the same time. So there are solutions that we can do working together, and I think we just need to let the legislature know that there's enough of us that believe that it's the right direction to go in, because otherwise we're not going to be able to do it.
Thank you, Senator. With that, I'd like to open up the panel to questions from the audience. So if anybody have a question, yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Drew Felker with iGate from Livermore. We're a decarbonization startup hub. In Livermore, we have a small number of people that have a lot of money that use CEQA as a tool to stop anything, but a lot of it has to do with renewable energy projects. I've heard that ministerial approval might be a way to help with getting projects done that otherwise can get stopped in the legal system. Is there any legislature, or do you have any opinion on that, Senator, or really any of you, on how we can maybe make CEQA less effective at stopping good projects?
That's a really good question. So one of the tools that we have created is called it's a expedited CEQA review. So if there's a litigation, so let me just say that CEQA has been misused, and there are places we need to reform it, but it's really difficult to get any bill passed through the legislature that reforms CEQA. Because it's got such a history in protecting the environment in California. And I've read more CEQA documents that I can tell you, and I believe CEQA can work. There's some challenges, and when we have a lot of time and a whiskey in front of us, we can talk about what they are. But what we did is we created a expedited judicial review, and what that does is that it creates, somebody files a CEQA litigation, a lawsuit, and the bill allows the preparation of all of the documents to be prepared expeditiously, and it gets it to court quickly, and the judge that's hearing the case has, if I recollect correctly, 270 days in order to hear all the arguments, hear all the testimony, and to make a decision. And so that is actually very quick. it ends the legal process and has been very successful in resolving CEQA litigation. And so we passed that bill for any solar and wind project, and I think we ought to extend it to hydrogen at least to hydrogen production at this point. Maybe carbon capture. I don't have that bill, but I have the hydrogen bill.
The comment I made a little while ago about a general permit, but a tiered system. Let me just be really clear. When I say a tiered system, those no-brainers, that truly has to have strong community support. And that community support, by and large, where we're seeing it, is where we're also talking about local ownership. We're not talking about some other company coming in that the people have no control over. And that's probably going to be a relatively smaller community, and a community, we're seeing examples of this. Like Placer County, they invest their county dollars in infrastructure projects. We now have a JPA, a Joint Powers Authority, in 5 of the Central Sierra counties where they're looking at exactly that. And I mentioned RCRC setting up their own funding mechanism. I think where we'll see local ownership, you're going to see more opportunities for those no-brainers, I'm calling them. But again, I said no-brainers at best are probably 30% of some of that potential general permitting. I'm not sure Livermore would probably be one of those sites, I hate to say. But there are places out there like that. And if we could get them going, it would allow us to implement projects. And by the way, when we implement these projects, we know a lot, we're going to do some great work, but we keep studying them, they're going to get better and better and better. And we're going to start having the years of data to then make the case to other communities that these can be clean facilities, they can be good jobs, they're good for the economy. Right now, some of this is still speculation. So the more data we get, the better off we are making any of that kind of case.
Just super quick, yeah, it used to be my job to manage CEQA for the governor. Really fun to do that. And I agree, like the whiskey, the conference over whiskey, I'm all in favor of that. But I think one of the challenges we have, and it's not just CEQA, it's NEPA at the national level too, is we're coming out of a long period of the industrial economy where we were like, this project is industrial and good for the economy, but it could be bad for the environment, so we need to regulate it and put a bunch of things in place. We're now having a conversation about this project could be good for the economy and it's helping us to resolve climate change and other environmental issues. So all of a sudden there's this porous boundary between these two things where we're talking about projects that are still industrial, but they are projects that could have benefits of making us, helping us to address climate challenges and cleaning the air and cleaning the water and other things. And so in some ways it's an old regulatory system, to your point, too, that's being applied to a set of new industries that aren't good by definition, but they are also trying to advance the same goals that were behind CEQA being written in the first place. So I do think that we need to take a hard look at how CEQA is being used. There was just a great report I recommended to everybody from SPUR, which is the San Francisco Public Urban Research, I don't remember what it stands for actually, Policy and Urban Research Organization, that makes the case, and I think it's super interesting, about how this state needs to have a state planning agency to think about these issues and take them out of the silos. So I'll just throw that out there as an idea.
Thank you, Kate. Before I recognize somebody else from the audience, I had the benefit of having 2 years with Governor Brown. I worked closely with him. If you wanted to send Governor Brown into a rage of apoplexy, you just mentioned CEQA. Other questions from the audience? Yes.
Hi, my name's Chantalise Pels, and I'm with Socio-Environmental and Education Network. We're a community-based nonprofit here in San Joaquin Valley, and we are working with a project planner, and we're doing community engagement and have the difficult task of deciphering these different, hard to understand technologies to local disadvantaged communities. So I have more of a comment. I appreciate a lot of it that I've been hearing today, and I also appreciate this change in tide where we have this federal initiative to include disadvantaged communities, environmental justice communities in these federal programs, funded programs. So this is great. The challenge we're finding is how that plays out on the ground. It's incredibly challenging to, when you're working with private companies, they have a different agenda than we do as a community-based organization, and oftentimes the communities themselves. And I think that there needed to be more investment in the social science aspect of creating these community benefit plans and the goals surrounding them and guidance. Because what we're finding is, because these projects, the developers were the ones that are receiving the funds and ultimately have control over how the project plays out. And it's a long process. They have to do a lot of work, and they have to check a lot of boxes. And doing the community engagement and outreach is a box to check. And it's not anything against them. I mean, they work very hard at what they do, and they're very professional. Our challenge is that the way businesses have been running and continue to run, there's often things that aren't disclosed to us, and we find out things after the fact, and we're kind of caught in the middle. And there are a lot of uncertainties in a lot of these projects, and we're feeling oftentimes that we're in this position of representing the communities. It's an enormous responsibility. And if anything were to come to pass where we're feeling like we didn't communicate things accurately, or we're not receiving the information, or if simply the information does not exist. And so these communities, in fact, are turning into sort of test objects. And I think because we feel this urgency, climate change, yes, we agree, needs to happen quickly, but this fast track is a challenge because we're not getting enough information about the potential impacts to these communities. So we have to decipher what these impacts might be, the risk to these communities, the risk to their local environment. We're talking about communities that are economically challenged, that are dealing with a lot of pollution, and they often are Spanish-speaking only communities. And so, and there's a timeline, right? And there's a feeling like, well, these projects are just going to happen anyways. An enormous amount of money has been invested. They don't want to lose their money. And so I guess my concern is that there needs to be more ground truthing going on. If we really want there to be buy-in, there needs to be more investment and time. How are we deciding what a benefit is? Is this really being scientifically assessed? Are we applying the same metrics and science that we're doing, applying to these technologies as we are to the people that are being impacted?
Thank you. I think we hear you, and I know the panel wants to respond.
Sure.
Right. So this is something my company does. We actually have an equity and justice team. We actually help engage on the ground. One of the things we learned by doing this with a project is we went long before the project was finished and designed. We went like 5 years before final investment decision. We started talking. The community was like, what? You want our input? That's awesome. There are positive ways to do this and still move quickly and still move well. One of the things I strongly believe, I wrote this up in the Washington Post, there are people here in the room who do this. The national labs are an asset in this regard because they work for you and they know things about stuff. To be clear, a lot of people from national labs will show up and be, let me lecture you about the second law of thermodynamics, which is not exactly what your community is looking for either, right? So we need to be humble about the fact that that's part of the human capital development. We have to train scientists to speak to communities and, importantly, to listen to communities, to really try to understand the concerns. And I want to share just one example with you because this is long in my life. One of the very best scientists I know worked on this report. Her name is Susan Hovorka from Texas. She injected 10,000 tons of carbon dioxide under the town of South Liberty. And she went to door, knocked on everybody in the town and was like, hi, my name's Sue. I want to inject carbon dioxide into your house. Let's talk. And there was a community meeting where this all came to a point. She was being super transparent, which is helpful, super proactive, which was helpful, wanted to get to yes before money was spent, all this stuff. So she went to the community meeting, and finally somebody stood up and said, "How do you tell me that the CO2 stays underground permanent?" And because Sue is smarter than me and better than me, she asked, "Sir, what do you mean by permanent?" And the man said, 30 years. And she said, "I guarantee you it'll be permanent," because she could do the science, could do that. And I say these things not to bury your concerns or comments, but there are ways to engage communities and be proactive using resources we have for not much money, for a little bit of training, that allows us to move quickly, but also allows us to move well.
As you were talking, I had a bazillion little thoughts about where the expenditure of resources might be the most appropriate. I hear you. I agree with you 100%. There has to be a way to be able to bring in resources that people can trust, and that have a certain level of expertise in the information. So I guess the question I have for you real quickly is, where would you put, like, we have created a bunch of technical assistance programs in legislation, but where would the technical assistance be most appropriate that you would trust to come in with you as a partner? Is it one of these organizations that he's talking about, number one? And number two is, I did a trip to Mexico to talk to scientists in Mexico. That was one of the things, was to talk about climate change. They're doing a whole bunch of work there. They speak Spanish, obviously, and their scientists could come and talk to people here in a language that people would understand. Hopefully not with all the technical words, but in a language people would understand. So if you can think through, I don't need the answer today, but think through, where would the technical assistance money go that would be the most helpful for you, that would help inform the community and get real engagement? Because we want real engagement. It's not a check the box. We want to hear from people. Where would that technical assistant, is there a trusted organization that you know? Would it be the local universities? Would it be the experts from the climate centers, cooperative extension? I mean, there's all kinds of, yeah, speaking of which, but what would make the most difference for you, I think, would be the
Yeah, sure. I don't think our struggle is we don't know how to do it. I feel like our organization does. We're a community-based organization. This is what we do. I work with Felipe here. He does community engagement. He's from the community. We know how to do it. I'm an environmental social scientist. I work with Letty here. She's also a scientist. We are action-oriented science. We put science into action, and we communicate what we know into the community. So that's not our issue. I think the issue we're having is this: sometimes the science just isn't there, and it's a complex science, and a lot of times these. And the issue is, we feel like there's a conflict between the companies themselves and what we're trying to do, and the speed at which this is happening. And there's not really, and what we're hearing is that when we ask, okay, what's the, for all of this carbon capturing that's happening, there's multiple actions that's going on. There's the development, there's the capturing, there's the transport, and there's the storage. Inherent in that, there's an energy use. So they say, yes, we need to do life cycle analysis. And we say, okay, that's great. Where is it? And so a lot of these things that we're asking about, we are not getting the information because they haven't done that type of analysis. They're not required to do the analysis. And then when we're talking about community benefit plans, they are required to do a benefit plan, but there's no enforcement and there's no oversight. So that's the challenge.
That's not true. So
Yeah.
Kate, you want to speak to that, but we have 30 seconds and that's it.
Yes, super fast. I mean, they're new, right? Community benefits plans didn't exist in the Department of Energy or anywhere until the infrastructure bill happened, so 2 years ago. So only the first set of things are going out with them now. But they are, I'm happy to say, number one, 20% of the evaluation of the project, which is really important because it means they're asking, DOE is asking the company to say, to do the research into everything you just said, to identify the benefits, to identify harm, to identify mitigation strategies. They are being evaluated by social scientists as 20% of the application, not by the technical review panel. So they're being evaluated by many of you, could all become evaluators. It is a huge need at the department. Once their commitment is made in that benefits plan, and if the project is awarded based on it, that commitment goes into the contract with the department. It's written into the contract. So that is actually an enforcement mechanism. There are go, no-go points throughout. The company's got to actually say, in Q1, I'm doing this, in Q2, I'm doing this, and those are written into the contract. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, it's to be seen how the go, no-go points work, because we just aren't there yet with any of these projects, but it is written in. Finally, you don't get 20% unless you have a community benefits agreement. You have to have an actual negotiated enforceable agreement with the community or the workforce to get the full 20 points, which means that there's a whole separate enforceable contract with the actual community. Totally agree with you. There needs to be more money for technical assistance. My biggest frustration in my role at DOE was that Congress didn't give us any money for technical assistance. So 100% of the money has to go out the door to the projects because of the way the legislation's written. That is a frustration. I think that is something legislatures all over the place could do better. And this one has done better, is to actually say, not only do you have to do the project, you have to do it well, and we're gonna actually support you in helping do it well. That's not in any of these current bills. It's certainly not in the Inflation Reduction Act, which is all tax credits. So I'm like very strongly focused on philanthropy and other folks doing that, but totally agree with you.
Okay, clearly there's more room for discussion. I'd like to thank the panelists very much. Senator Caballero, Kate, Glenda, Julio, thank you very much.